Today, gold hit new all-time high of over $3,500 per ounce, and that prompted multiple tweets from very smart people on X that the US dollar keeps losing its power and the end is imminent, and that smart money and governments are transitioning from US dollar as a reserve currency into gold, Bitcoin, and real estate. In this video, I want to look deeper into those claims and whether we should all be worried. I'll start with a brief history. The US dollar accent towards becoming the global currency, the global reserve currency, was evident in the early 20th century, but it was not formalized until post-World War II. So before then, we had the British Empire and their vast trade networks and their gold standard that supported its about 60% dominance of all the world reserves. So in the 1900s, just like about 100 years ago, we had that. The whole shift towards the US dollar accelerated after World War I, when the US emerged as a major creditor to all the European countries that were really hurt by that war. And by the interwar period, the US really gained its prominence and started the economic boom, whereas the European countries were struggling. And then the World War II hit, which was also a big shock for the European countries mostly, and the US could sustain themselves, and they kept the economic prosperity. The pivotal moment of the whole situation was by the end of the World War II in 1944 with the Bretton Woods Agreement, when 44 countries allied and decided to use US dollar as a world reserve currency. That means that they all pegged their currencies to the US dollar, whereas the US dollar was backed and pegged to the price of gold at $35 per ounce. The whole system was backed by the US dollar holding the largest gold reserves at the time, which allowed it to secure the post-World War reconstruction for other countries and become the creditor for them and continue this whole thing. But it's not to say that there was just smooth sailing, because the US also faced some economic struggles in the 1960s when there was a Vietnam War and some other events in the US that led to really high inflation and high gold outflows. So Nixon, very famous event happened that many people in crypto and in Bitcoin talk about. In 1971, there was a Nixon shock when the US dollar divorced from gold standard and it became the fiat dollar. So the fiat system meant that it was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by the US kind of military presence, its economic growth, and it was just fueled by the US reputation. So to say, you trust the government, but the government can keep printing the money no matter how much gold they have. So everybody predicted that it would decline. However, the US really grew economically, and there was a lot of developments and economic prosperity in other aspects, which allowed the dollar to persist as the world reserve currency. And it was also solidified as a kind of great currency thanks to the petrodollar agreement. You could think of it as like the oil became the security for the US dollar. That was when the US agreed with OPEC countries, led mostly by Saudi Arabia, to price all the oil in USD and invest the differences and surpluses in US treasuries. And that would be in turn for the US military protection for those countries. You could argue that the main reason why the US dollar kept being the world reserve currency despite being a fiat system for over 50 years is the fact that there are just no good alternatives. The euro launched in 1999, and it was kind of serious for a little bit, but it peaked at 26% of the global reserves in around 2000, and after that it only declined. So long story short, there were no good alternatives, even though there was the 2008 crisis and there were several other fear-mongerings. Nothing really happened. It fluctuated. The US kind of dominance of the dollar in the reserves fluctuated, but it didn't really go so low that it could be replaced by something else. The main argument against the US dollar being perceived as a safe haven asset is the geopolitical tensions that the US is facing. It is mainly due to the sanctions that it imposed on Russia and the seizing of the Russian assets that were in the US dollars, and also all the tariffs and all the geopolitical uncertainties that are happening right now. So that led to the coalition of BRICs countries, which notably included really big countries like China, India, and Russia, to trade in their own currencies and think for plans to develop some other third currencies maybe that are not tied to any particular country, including the US. So basically, they want to de-dollarize as much as possible. and they are a considerable amount of GDP. So if you look, I have this tweet that China, about 1.4 billion, India 1.4 billion people, Russia 144 million, and Turkey 85 million. Those are the two largest countries in BRICs. So those are 37.5% of the world moving away from the US dollar. So that is significant. And those countries, seemingly, we've seen from the data, were accumulating gold. So that is a fair argument to say that BRICS transitioning away from the dollar could be kind of the turning point for it to no longer be the reserve currency. But on the other hand, no other currency has the prominence of the US dollar. Like, it's already so deep rooted into all the systems that it would be difficult to get it out. It is used in 84% of all the forex trades, and 54% of all the global trades happen in US dollars. This is really difficult to beat and combat with any other third currency, which may lack either scalability or trust, or just the whole fact that you choose the lesser of the two evils, so to say, with the US dollar. And plus, the US has a really big military to support it. Another argument for de-dollarization is the economic indicators, and in particular, the US dollar debt being over $37 trillion, and the interest rate payments for it being higher than the defense level budget, which is an insane thing to say, and some people project that it will only be worse from here. To further enhance that, central banks are choosing gold over US treasuries, and holdings of gold are now surpassing treasuries for the first time since 1996. The argument against this and for dollar staying where it's at is again choosing the lesser of the two evils, or of multiple evils, so to say. So the US dollar is still, while it's inflating, it's not hyperinflating, and the inflation is lower than that in the European countries, for instance. And the US markets still have deep liquidity and really large trade networks that would be difficult to kind of combat. The demise of the US dollar has been promised since 2008, and people have been waiting for it, and it hasn't happened until now. But what's different in 2025? Well, first of all, we have alternatives now, like Bitcoin, that is gaining more and more prominence, and in particular is starting to be kind of accepted as a global reserves more and more outside of the US too, but especially in the US. And if you look into the central banks accumulating gold, where 166 tons were added in just Q2 of 2025, and many of them, most of them actually, expected the share to continue to rise, and we hit the new gold all-time high, and it has been increasing really significantly. At the same time, you could argue that in any turbulent time, the gold share is increasing and the gold price is increasing, and the gold increasing in price therefore reflects in its becoming a higher share of all the reserves. So if we just go back to the chart, it was, yes, gold that was eating up the share of the US dollar from the global reserves, but this is also other currencies. And I really wonder what you guys think, because being in crypto and being in a bubble, people here strongly believe that the US trillions dollars of debt are going to destroy the dollar's power. But it's difficult to argue with the US military and its already kind of omnipresence in all the economic trades. So it would be really difficult for the whole world if the US fell. So I really am still forming my opinion about the whole situation. And that's partially why I'm making this video, to kind of teach myself about what's going on in the world. I hope it was kind of useful for you. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments, and see you in the next one.